Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show that helps you cut through all the noise and get right to the heart of things. Today, we're diving deep into some sources you've sent us, all about productivity and procrastination, which, let's be honest, we all struggle with sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. We're using Darius Foroux's book, Do It Today, as our main guide here.
Perfect. And it's funny because right in the preface, Foroux talks about how the world we live in today can make us feel like we're just constantly reacting to things, emails, messages, notifications. It's like we're never truly in control of our time.
Right, it's that always on feeling. But the whole point of Do It Today is to take back that control. It's about focusing on what matters and actually getting things done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Foroux doesn't just preach this stuff, he actually lived it. He talks about going from being a major procrastinator to, well, living by the do it today philosophy.
Yeah, there's this great story he tells about pushing through a really tough bike ride by just repeating that phrase to himself, do it today. It became this mantra for him, this way of staying present and overcoming challenges.
It's such a simple but powerful idea. And that's basically how the book is structured, which is how we're going to tackle this deep dive for you. We'll start with overcoming procrastination, how to actually stop putting things off.
Then we'll move on to improving productivity. Not just with quick tips, but by really understanding what it means to be productive in a deeper sense.
And finally, we'll look at how to achieve more in the long run, staying on track and seeing the power of consistent action.
So this isn't going to be a surface level thing. We really want to give you a solid understanding of the mindset and the strategies that can help you be more effective and get things done without sacrificing your well-being.
Okay, let's jump into part I of Do It Today, where Foroux focuses on overcoming procrastination. What really stood out to you in this section?
Well, the first few chapters really hammer home this idea that procrastination is often an inner battle. We tend to blame external things for our lack of progress.
Right, like, oh, it's too noisy or my internet is slow.
Exactly. But Ford challenges us to look at how much we're letting those external factors control us. It's about taking responsibility for our own actions or lack thereof.
So it's not just about changing our environment, it's about changing our mindset.
Exactly. He talks about this time when he was freelancing and he just kept avoiding all the tough tasks that would actually help him grow his business. He even ended up taking a regular job just to escape that discomfort.
Wow, so sometimes procrastination is less about laziness and more about fear.
Yeah, fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of just plain hard work. But he makes it clear. Wishing you'd do it tomorrow won't get you anywhere. It's about creating a system for getting things done today.
So like a set of rules or habits that make productivity more automatic.
Exactly. He argues that we're kind of wired to procrastinate. It's like our default setting. The key, he says, is to have systems in place to guide us instead of relying on willpower alone, which, let's be honest, doesn't always work.
Systems over willpower.
Yeah.
I like that. So what kind of systems does he recommend?
He talks about a lot of tactics, like setting your own deadlines, telling others about your goals to create accountability, and using focused work intervals like the Pomodoro technique. The point is, when you combine these tactics, you create a framework that makes taking action much more likely.
So it's like setting yourself up for success rather than just trying to force yourself to work.
Or precisely. But he also emphasizes that no system will work if you don't have some inner motivation. You have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Even if a task feels tedious, connecting it to a bigger purpose can make it more bearable.
That's so important, finding that connection to something meaningful. Okay, but sometimes even if you're motivated, focusing can be a huge challenge. What does Forough say about that?
He's got a whole chapter dedicated to improving focus, and his advice is pretty straightforward. Eliminate, eliminate, eliminate. He says we tend to accumulate so much stuff, possessions, commitments, ideas, that it clutters our mind and makes it hard to concentrate.
So sometimes being productive is about subtracting, not adding.
Exactly. He talks about how he started a YouTube channel, and while it was successful, it started taking up way too much of his time and energy, pulling him away from writing, which he truly loved.
So he had to make a tough choice and cut something out, even though it was working.
Yeah, he realized it was actually hindering his bigger goals. And he sees this principle of elimination as applicable to all areas of life. It's about simplifying, getting rid of the things that distract us from what matters.
So less is more, in a way. But distractions aren't always external, are they? Our own thoughts and feelings can affect our focus too.
Absolutely. He talks about how Low levels of serotonin in the brain can make it harder to stay focused on long-term goals, making us more prone to instant gratification.
Like reaching for your phone instead of working on that project?
Exactly. But he references research showing that simply recalling positive past experiences can actually boost serotonin production, which can then improve our focus.
That's interesting. So our emotional state can directly affect our ability to concentrate.
Right. And he also stresses being aware of those seemingly small things we do that sabotage our focus, like constantly checking our phones or getting caught up in gossip. He says we need to be intentional about what we allow into our minds and actively resist those distractions.
So it's about being mindful of where we direct our attention, both externally and internally. Okay, let's move on to part 2 of Do It Today, Improving Productivity. What did you find most insightful here?
Well, one thing that really stood out was his discussion about the impact of smartphones. He cites a study that showed people performed worse on concentration tests when a smartphone was simply present on their desk.
Really? Even if they weren't actively using it?
Yeah, it's like our brains are constantly aware of the potential for distraction, even when we're trying to focus on something else.
It's that constant pull of connection and information. So what's the solution? Ditch our smartphones entirely.
Well, that's not very realistic for most of us. But he shares his own strategies for managing smartphone use, like turning off most notifications, leaving unnecessary group chats, and only using his phone for specific, intentional activities.
So it's about being in control of our technology, not letting it control us.
Exactly. He also talks about how perfectionism can actually hinder productivity. People who strive for perfection often procrastinate because they're terrified of not meeting their own incredibly high standards.
So they either never start or they never feel like they've done enough.
Right. And this can lead to all sorts of negative emotions and ultimately prevent them from getting anything done. He recommends cultivating learned resourcefulness instead.
What's that?
It's basically your ability to manage your emotions and thoughts when things get tough. It's about problem solving, delaying gratification, and finding a balance between striving for quality and actually getting things done.
So aiming for excellence without getting trapped in the pursuit of perfection.
Exactly. Now, Foroux also includes some articles in Do It Today that offer a slightly different perspective on productivity. For example, there's one about reading 100 books a year.
That sounds more like a personal development goal than a productivity hack.
True, but it reflects his philosophy of continuous learning and growth. He encourages finding those little pockets of time throughout the day to read and, more importantly, developing a system for actually absorbing and applying what you read.
So it's about making learning a regular part of your life.
Precisely. And he also talks about taking breaks and vacations, which might seem counterintuitive, but he argues they're crucial for productivity in the long run.
Right, because we can't be on all the time.
Exactly. He references research showing that time off reduces stress and burnout. He sees rest as an investment in our ability to work effectively when we are working.
So it's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Absolutely. And he even gives tips for making vacations more restorative, like truly disconnecting from work and being present in the moment.
Makes sense. And he also addresses those common productivity pitfalls, like mindless internet browsing.
Yeah, he talks about how we can lose hours scrolling through social media or watching random videos, ending up with that feeling of, where did the time go? He emphasizes being mindful of how we spend our time online and actively working to break those unproductive habits.
It's about being intentional, not just letting the internet suck us in. Okay, let's move on to the final part of Do It Today, achieving more. This section seems to be about the long game, right?
Exactly. It's about sustaining your productivity and working towards those bigger goals. One of the first things Four addresses here is the feeling of not knowing what you really want, which I think a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah, it's easy to feel lost or pressured to have it all figured out.
Right. But he says it's okay to not have all the answers right now. He suggests focusing on your general direction rather than needing a specific destination.
So it's like having a compass instead of a map.
Exactly. He uses his own journey as an example. He didn't start out knowing he'd build a successful blog, but he knew he wanted to do work that felt meaningful. He also recommends developing those foundational skills like self-discipline, effectiveness, and communication, which will be valuable no matter what path you take.
It's about building a solid base while you're still figuring things out.
Precisely. And here's something else that might surprise some people. He advises leaving the office on time and not bringing work home. He challenges that always-on culture where long hours are often valued more than actual results.
It's about setting boundaries and protecting your personal time.
Exactly. And this ties into another major theme in this section: consistency. He dedicates a whole chapter to the power of consistent effort, even if it's just a small improvement each day.
So it's not about those big sporadic bursts of effort. It's about showing up day after day.
Right. He says inconsistency is the real enemy of progress. He even connects this to Stoic philosophy, focusing on what you can control your actions and your mindset and accepting that setbacks will happen.
It's about having a long-term perspective and not getting derailed by those inevitable bumps in the road.
Exactly. And he also challenges the idea that we need to constantly be pushing ourselves way outside our comfort zone to achieve magic. While trying new things is good, he believes true growth comes from sustained effort and persistence, not sudden transformations.
Like building a muscle, you don't get ripped overnight.
Exactly. And finally, he talks about the power of belief, not just in some abstract sense, but as a practical tool for shaping our reality.
So if you believe you can do something, you're more likely to actually do it.
Right. He encourages us to examine our limiting beliefs and recognize that we have the power to choose what we believe, which in turn influences our actions and outcomes. He even shares a personal story about overcoming self-doubt to become a successful writer.
It all comes full circle, doesn't it? From overcoming procrastination to building consistent habits to ultimately believing in yourself.
It really does. As we wrap up this deep dive into Do It today, a few key themes emerge that I think you'll find really valuable.
Let's hear them.
First, procrastination is often an internal battle, not just a time management issue. It's about understanding our own psychology and how we deal with challenging tasks.
Second, managing our attention is crucial in today's world. We need to be proactive about eliminating distractions, both external and internal.
Third, sometimes doing nothing or taking breaks is essential for long-term productivity and well-being. Rest is not the enemy, it's a key part of the equation.
Fourth, a lack of meaning in our work can fuel procrastination. Finding your why and connecting to a larger purpose can make a huge difference.
And finally, consistent small improvements are a more sustainable and effective path to achievement than relying on sporadic bursts of effort.
Those are some powerful takeaways. Now, to build on these insights and some of the other sources you shared, here's a final thought for you.
I challenge you to identify one specific time waster in your life, something you do regularly that doesn't really bring you any value. Now, imagine the impact of eliminating or significantly reducing that one activity.
It's a small step, but it could make a big difference in how you approach your time and your goals.
Exactly. As you reflect on that, think about which of these concepts resonated most with you and how you might apply them to your own challenges and aspirations.
Remember, this deep dive is just the beginning. The real work starts when you take these ideas and put them into action.
We hope this has given you a solid understanding of some key principles for boosting your productivity and overcoming procrastination. Now it's up to you to do it today.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.